How much do you think from what we talked about is going to be restricted by social media?
I hope as little as possible, but I honestly don't know.
Is there really a climate crisis?
That's the question.
That causes poverty.
Yes, and people will die, right? Because we need to kill 7.5 billion people. You're gonna make the list, not me. And how can you search for truth without expanding and without questioning the existing knowledge?
Shalom, Professor Jonathan Dubi. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. Here, we're in Jerusalem, below the Jaffa Gate, bustling street, as everybody can hear already. Can you introduce yourself to our viewers, please?
Thank you for having me and inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come to Jerusalem. I'm professor of theoretical physics and chemistry at Ben Gurion University in Israel. I'm also a member of Ben Gurion University's School for Sustainability and Climate Change and the School for Nanoscale Science and Technology, also at Ben Gurion University. I'm also one of the founders of the Israeli Forum for Rational Environmentalism, which is basically a think tank advocating for rational thinking in topics of climate, environment, and energy.
So you're not a climate expert, are you?
Right. So you need to define an expert. So climate science is a huge thing. And I'm not an atmospheric scientist. I don't do dynamics of clouds or things like that. What I do is theoretical physics. And what I really do for a living is I look at physical systems, natural systems, and then I construct models for these systems, but typically mathematical models, and then I compare the two. And I try to say, did I catch the essence of the real system with my mathematical model? And I've become pretty good at this. I've been doing this for the last 20 years. I also do have an expertise in the physics of solar panels and energy transport specifically. This is something I've been doing for the last 10 years, both in academia and industry. So I know a little bit about that. And these are the set of skills that I took here to this topic that we're going to frame: climate, environment, and energy.
The headlines a few weeks ago were a third of Pakistan is under the water, unprecedented number of earthquakes, and eruption of volcanoes. While I was in London not long ago, they said the temperatures are record high, asphalt was melting. For a common person, it sounds like within few weeks we're doomed, we're done, it's over. Now, is there really a climate crisis?
That's the question. And we need to first understand that crisis is not a scientific word. It's a word from the realm of human experience. So what we need to do when we're addressing the scientific facts and the evidence and the data is to try and quantify what we mean by a crisis. And let's think, first of all, what we know. Well, we do know that the temperatures of the globe have been rising. Now, the globe is a big place, the world is a big place, and it doesn't have a temperature, right? It varies, the temperature varies over day and night, winter and summer. Different places around the globe have different temperatures.
You're quoting the Bible right now.
Well,
because in Genesis, that's what it says. When God created it was day and night, cold and warm, winter and summer. You're just quoting. Go ahead.
Well, and you know, the evidence supports this.
Yep, I know that.
And you can cook up a number, an average number, taking all sorts of these things into account, and ask what happened to this number, right? And as far as we know from the data, that number has indeed risen. In the last 120 years or so, it has risen by about 1.1 degrees centigrade. Now, is this a crisis? That's not a well-defined question, right? Because we hardly feel it in our lifetime because the change is so slow. 1 degree over 100 years, we don't really feel it personally. So you need statistics. So let's try to quantify crisis. What's the worst thing that can happen? People talk about sea level rise.
Correct.
Right?
That's the major concern.
That's a major concern.
And they always show you melting the glaciers and icebergs, and that's where they go with it.
Right, and you see pictures of Manhattan underwater, and in Hollywood you see movies. But what the data shows, and we have pretty good data about sea level rise, is two things. You look at the sea level, at the height of the sea level, and you see two things. First of all, the sea level has been steadily rising since the mid-19th century. So long before humans started emitting anything into the atmosphere.
Is that the 1800s?
Yes, 1850, 1870, we were coming out of the Little Ice Age. Europe was frozen. And as Europe started to defreeze, sea levels are beginning to rise. Now, sea level rise due to two things. One is the thermal expansion of the oceans, and second is the melting of the icebergs. And it's constantly rising regardless of what we did, because it started long before we started emitting anything. Now, the second thing you can do is look at the rate of sea level rise. And when you look at the numbers, you see that the rate of sea level in the past 100 years is 3 millimeters per year. That's 3 centimeters a decade.
Which is a little bit more than an inch.
A little bit more than an inch. And 30 centimeters a century. That's,
22 inches.
22 inches, right? Now, in a century.
22 centimeters in a
century. In a century.
In 100 years.
In 100 years.
Wow.
That's not an immediate, imminent catastrophe. It's just, something to take into account. Build a small seawall or put some sandbags near the ocean front, and you're done with it. We have examples of nations who dealt with this pretty easily. The Netherlands has been underwater for centuries, and they basically solved this problem with canals and seawalls. That's easy technology. During high tides, 50% of Netherlands area is underwater, and they had no casualty from a flood since 1953. It's also not uniform across the globe. And many of the places which have high sea level rise is actually due to the land sinking. In Israel, the sea level rise is 0.7 millimeters a year. That's 7 centimeters in a century.
That's less than 3 inches. Wow.
Yes, it's just, I do not see why is this a catastrophe. Now, people who talk about this as a catastrophe say, oh, we're going to wait, in 100 years, we're going to see the sea in somewhere else. And really, people are just going to wait? No one is going to do nothing if they see the level rise. That's just not how people work. They're going to build a seawall, maybe move a building a few meters back. People are going to adapt to this problem. It's very slow. It's not frightening.
But the question is, first of all, there's always extreme weather events.
This is the second fear, right? Extreme weather events. But when you look at the data, and amazingly enough, the data has been accumulated by none else than the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This is the body chartered by the UN to gather everything we know about the climate crisis. And we can talk about the IPCC and its origins.
We will talk about the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Pact in a few seconds.
The IPCC sends out a report every few years. The last one came out in 2018. And these reports are built in several parts. One, the first part is the scientific report. That's not a bad report. It's huge, 2,800 pages long. I've read most of them.
And let me guess, very few people read it.
Very few people read it. It's a daunting and extremely boring task.
And you read almost 2,000 pages?
Yes. It's very hard to do. Yes, and it's very technical. It's not an easy read. And so out of this paper, they dilute a summary for policymakers. That's about 40 pages long, not written by scientists, written by bureaucrats and politicians. And even this, no one reads. So it's diluted to a summary for policymakers, about 40 pages long. This is not written by scientists. It's written by bureaucrats and
So
politicians.
2,800 pages written by scientists.
Yes.
Diluted to 40 pages for policymakers that were not written by scientists.
Not written by scientists, and even this no one actually reads. They dilute this to a few pages of bullet points, and this they hand out to politicians and news outlets
And how
the
far
media.
are those bullet points from the 2,800 pages?
Amazingly far.
Far.
And extreme weather events are the example for that. Because if you read the summary for policymakers or the bullet points, you are for sure, you know that we are facing extreme weather events. But as you look at the statistics, and this
Of
is written,
their report.
Yes, black and white, you see that there is no evidence whatsoever that there was a rise in extreme events in the last 100 years, where the temperature has already risen by 1 degree centigrade. There was no rise in floods, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones, winter storms, hailstorms, thunderstorms.
No rise.
No rise whatsoever.
So the fact that I'm seeing more of that, it's because somebody wants me to see more of that.
You are not seeing more of that. You are being reported more about this. Think about the droughts in Central Europe that we're now hearing about in the news. It turns out that droughts are very well documented because it's easy to know if there's a drought. And these have been documented in
Droughts
Central
were
Europe.
documented in the Bible also.
For
That's
sure.
that far.
Droughts, they're one of the drivers of many of the biblical stories. We know
Yes,
this.
exactly.
And they've been documented throughout history in Central Europe for sure. And the last droughts do not even enter the worst 10 droughts. It turns out droughts in Central Europe are actually connected to cold weather rather than warm weather.
Wow.
No one knows this. Just read the data and read the science, and you'll see that. But it's very hard. You need to dig into the data.
You're saying it's the cold that kills the plant rather than the sun that is actually giving it a lot of life.
For sure. And of course, this changes from place to place around the globe. In Central Europe, we know for sure the mega droughts, the drought that gave rise to the Great Hunger in Ireland, for example.
Yes.
There was a huge mega drought. This was caused during an extremely cold time.
So you read models, you read data, and you see a huge gap between what we're being told to what the situation on the ground is.
Yes. And again, the amazing thing is that you just need to read the original reports. Let me give you another example coming from the realm of economics, not science, because we're trying to quantify crisis, right? Mm-hmm. So you can ask, okay, maybe extreme weather events are not rising, but we're going to pay so much for the warming, right? So you can ask, what would be the effect of the temperature rise on the GDP, on how materially wealthy we are, right? Which is an important thing, because most of the world is poor, and we want them to be wealthy. We want them to live a fruitful and flourishing lives, and you need wealth for that. And it turns out people have did that. Not only people, a very specific person named Professor William Nordhaus from Yale won a Nobel Prize for constructing exactly models to calculate this. And there have been generations of models. Now, if you look at the IPCC report,
They quoted it.
it's there. The data is there. You see that for a 3 degree centigrade rise, which is maybe something that's going to happen within 100 years from now, we don't know, but maybe we can talk about this, the total loss of GDP will be about 3 to 5%. Now this is
I know what you're going to say. You're going to compare the total loss of GDP now to the implementation of all of these agreements.
Well, exactly. Now, you look at the rise of the GDP in the next 100 years, it's going to be 450% because we're going to grow as humanity. So instead of being rich by 4.5 times, we're going to be rich by 4.36 times. That's a 6-year delay.
Yes.
That's
it.
an imminent crisis?
And I have a question. So we talked about 2015 Paris Agreement that at the time President Trump left, and in 2021 America rushed back into it. What would have the implementation of this agreement, first of all, what is this agreement trying to say? And what would be the damage to world economy from the implementation thereof?
The Paris Agreement is unbelievable. The Paris Agreement is not a legally binding document. It's kind of a voluntary agreement or a statement of intentions signed by countries in the UN in 2015 in Paris, stating that they will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, mainly CO2, but also other greenhouse gases. And there are two important things about this agreement. First of all, it cannot be done. They cannot do it. We cannot do this. And we can talk about the technology.
You're saying we, as much as we
humanities,
want, cannot change, cannot reduce temperature.
No, and we can talk
it's
about
scientifically,
this. I believe so.
As a professor.
Yes, it's an engineering thing. And we can talk about this a lot at length. The second thing is the costs. The costs of abiding to the Paris Agreements are unbelievable. A good few percent of the GDP of the US economy every year. 7% of the Mexican economy. 9% of the Brazilian economy.
They cannot afford it.
Of course not. And the worst thing is that if all countries would do exactly what they committed to do in the Paris Agreements, till the year 2070, at horrific costs, using the models of the IPCC.
Their own models.
Their own models. The change in temperature, the global temperature would be 0.07 degrees centigrade. Unmeasurable.
But the life of hundreds of millions will be unbearable.
And this is already happening.
I've seen demonstrations of Dutch farmers and now German farmers. They're being told to kill their cows. Literally.
Yesterday, the Secretary of the EU announced that all EU countries are committed to reducing private usage of energy during peak hours. This means literally that the citizens of European countries will not be allowed to use as much electricity as they want. They cannot heat their homes, or cool their homes, or watch TV, or use a wash disher and the fridge at the same time, or drive their car. These are restrictions which will come from the EU to their personal lives because they don't have enough electricity. And the reason the Europeans do not have enough electricity, people will tell you, oh, this is all due to Putin and the crisis in the Ukraine. And this is a misleading statement. Wow. Because the energy crisis in Europe started way before the Ukraine crisis. It started from decision made 10 and 15 years ago, fueled by climate panic.
Wow.
And climate alarmism. Because the Europeans, we're so afraid of CO2, we are not going to burn anything on Europe. We're going to invest all our efforts into wind power and solar panels in Belgium, which has 300 cloudy days a year. But more than that, we will not invest in infrastructure for fossil fuel-based power. So they did not build storage facilities. They banned searching for new oil, gas, and natural gas fields in the North Sea and in the mainland. They banned fracking, which, we're talking to mainly US listeners. The fracking changed the economy of the United States. It's an amazing thing. And you cannot frack in the continental Europe.
Amazing.
They banned it completely. And they put all their will on wind power, which is intermittent. Now, we need power not when the sun is shining, not when the wind is blowing. We need power when we need power. So in order to compensate for the intermittency, you use natural gas.
And that's when Putin gets into the
That's what
picture.
Putin. And the Germans and the rest of Europe decided not only that they're going to invest in intermittent sources, which means investing really in gas, natural gas, they're going to buy everything from one person. The one person you can trust.
And that Vladimir Putin, who is now showing them that he's a very...
the origin of the crisis is not
Amazing.
Putin. It's the decisions. Now, I have to say, I'm not a huge Trump supporter. He has many flaws as president, but he did some amazing things. Honestly, he did. One of the amazing things he did is pull out of the Paris agreements, and there's a recording. It's all over the internet. You can look it up, where he's meeting with NATO delegates. And he's saying, what are we doing here? I'm paying for NATO to guard the European borders, and you are buying 40% of your
gas
from Russia.
He's the enemy of NATO.
And they're laughing at him. There's a German and the
Angela
Danish,
Merkel, she really laughed.
and they're laughing at him. And it turned out...
They thought he's the ignorant.
And he turned out to be amazingly correct. And this is the weakness of the Western free world, powered by climate panic.
Amazing.
That's the origin of this energy catastrophe. And we're facing an energy catastrophe, and there are ripples effects for that. And you will feel them.
Of course.
This is increasing, unbelievable rise in energy prices. We see this in the US. This is a ripple effect.
That causes poverty.
Yes. And people will die.
Yes.
Because, and this is something maybe the audience should know, heat is a much milder
cause of death
than cold. In the and this is a well-known, well-documented statistics. In the Western countries, people die 4 times more from cold than from heat. In the underdeveloped countries, 20 times more.
From cold?
Yes, in India and in Africa, where you're thinking, the warm places, still 20 times more deaths from cold than from heat.
Amazing.
Because the human body has evolved in heat, in hot places. We're a tropical species. If it's hot outside, 40 degrees centigrade, you go to the shade, you drink a glass of water, you'll be fine. If you have 3 consecutive days of -5 degrees centigrade, you will die. And people will not be able to afford heating their houses in Europe.
Amazing. Yoni, before we go to the heart of this interview, which is the spiritual side of this whole movement, I have 2 questions for you. First of all, is CO2 really something that causes temperatures to rise?
Yes.
And the second question is, were you once on the other side and then you saw the light and came to this conclusion, or were you always like this?
Okay, let's first answer the first question. So, the central dogma, which now rules climate science and the related policy, is that the entire heating of the last 50 years, the global rise in temperatures, is all due to man-made CO2. Now, what do we know? We know indeed that CO2 is what we call a greenhouse gas, meaning that it's a molecule composed of 3 atoms. It has what we call, the scientific term is soft vibrations. It indeed captures the heat that comes out in the form of radio waves from the Earth, absorbs in the infrared, that's some technical terms, and heats up. It's a greenhouse gas. So if you put it in a light bulb and you shine light, it will heat up. What we do not know...
So we're not a light bulb.
We're not a light bulb. That's exactly the point. We don't know whether or not this is the main factor contributing to heating. Now, this you need to contrast with the fact that we know for sure that the Earth temperature has changed dramatically during all time scales, starting from the 20th century, as we discussed, going to the medieval warm period 1,000 years ago, and the Roman warm period, and the optimal period of the Holocene. Temperature of the Earth is fully capable of changing without changes in CO2, due to changes in the Earth's orbit around the sun. So we don't know. It's a thesis. Now, as scientific theses go, we need to prove it. Now, it's a very extreme thesis that a system as complicated as the climate, which is one of the most complicated physical systems known to science, is controlled by a single knob. That's an extreme statement.
Exactly.
And extreme statements require extreme proofs, if I may quote Carl Sagan, which is one of the most prominent physicists of the 20th century.
One of the founders of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, Canadian guy, very sharp guy, once said, when two things happen at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're connected. And then he gave a great example. He said, summertime, there's more shark bites and there's more consumption of ice creams. It doesn't mean that shark bites causes a larger consumption of ice cream. And do you hold the same opinion that people are linking two things and it's not necessarily proven to be accurate?
It's unproven.
Unproven.
Correlation is not causation. This is a founding principle in science, specifically in statistical science like climate. There is no, what we would call in science, a smoking gun evidence that CO2 is related even to the majority of heating. We simply do not know. Now, this is something, you know, you won't hear a lot of scientists say, right?
That they don't know. It's
Right.
like confession of
Confession of
defeat.
ignorance,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But that's the honest truth. It's a complicated system. We don't know. It might be correct. It might be completely wrong. The truth is probably, and at least from my understanding of the physics, is that it's about, you know, maybe 20% or a quarter up to a third.
It's a contributor, but
It's a
not the cause.
contributor,
The main
but it's
cause.
not the cause. And that means we have a lot more time.
Yes.
It's definitely not the main cause, in my opinion, but I might be wrong. But the thing to understand is that we don't know. And there's actually, this is stated in the IPCC reports in something called the equilibrium climate sensitivity. That's the number that relates temperature to CO2. And it's all over the place. And our estimations of the contribution to CO2 hasn't changed from 1979. After billions of dollars invested into climate science.
And it still hasn't.
We don't know the
I see,
answer.
I see. I saw one of your interviews with a Princeton University professor, Bill Happer, exactly. And he said something very interesting. He said, when you ask him, so can you put a finger at where did it all start? And then he mentioned something that I think for many of the listeners, it kind of went out right above them, but it caught my attention. He said that somewhere in one of the meetings of the Club of Rome, things began to change. The Club of Rome is one of those gatherings of the elite globalists.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I would take it slightly even before that. During the 60s, there was the starting of the rise of the environmental movement.
Okay.
And with prominent figures like Rachel Carson, who wrote a very famous book called Silent Spring, about the dangers of using DDT in order to extinct malaria, which, you know, people followed that and it caused millions of deaths in Africa before they, you know, recuperated and started using DDT again, because malaria is a terrible killer. And people like Paul Ehrlich from Stanford University, who wrote a famous book called The Population Bomb, where he warned us that that's it. We will have no food until the year 2000.
That's it.
Millions of people will starve to death. India will be gone as a country. The UK will dissolve. You know, all these crazy Malthusian predictions all turning out to be wrong. Now, then several things happened. In '84, the Berlin Wall fell down. And all the people who were looking for a cause, and they were fighting, you know, the separation of Europe.
In the Berlin Wall?
Yes.
You're talking about 89?
Maybe 1890, yes. And this is something I learned from Patrick Moore, which we mentioned. He was there. And he tells about the lines of people coming from the demonstrations and then signing up for Greenpeace. So people were looking for a meaning, and then groups started forming. You mentioned the Club of Rome, which is one group, the Sierra Club, which is also one of the most strong environmental groups, environmental NGOs, which handles a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars per year. The Worldwide Fund, Greenpeace, all these NGOs, all these groups started focusing on environmental issues. And then two things happened. The communist Russia fell down. There was no longer a cause fighting communism. And there were people who were, in a way, sentiment to the communist ideal were suddenly lost because they had nothing material in the world to say, oh, we can identify ourselves with this. And
so socialism, Marxism, communism suffered a blow.
yes,
And these people are now out there to find a different vehicle
yes,
to somehow spread their ideas.
yes, and you can trace the beginning of the climate crisis to two events. One of them is, as you mentioned, the Club of Rome, which issued a report known as the Limits to Growth, which turned out to be completely wrong. You know, nothing of what they said actually came to be.
But the one thing that remained is their hatred towards population growth.
Yes, and we will talk about this.
Yes.
And the second thing is a testimony by a Professor James Hansen, which was the leading climate scientist in NASA,
Yes.
in a congressional statement, where he said, oh, the Earth is warming. And following an amazing series of predictions, you know, Florida will be underwater, Arctic sea ice will be gone by the year 2000, skiing in Aspen will be gone. I went to skiing in Aspen in 2008 when I was a postdoc in the US. And people were saying, we should ski now because in a few years it's gone.
And when did you go to ski again after that?
Well, I go to ski almost every year when I can. And you know, snows in Aspen are still there and they're doing fine. None of these climate catastrophic predictions have come true. You know, we have a saying in the Talmud, the Hebrew studies of the Bible, that since the fall of Solomon's temple, prophecy was given to fools and children.
Yes.
And this is the honest statement of a scientist. We don't know enough about the climate system to make good predictions. We simply can't do that.
So, as we hinted earlier, somehow the pointed finger is at humans. And at the alarming rate of population growth, and humans become, I'm following the system of these people, the way they think, we're the enemy.
Yes.
Humans are now the enemy.
Am
I right?
I completely agree with this. When you try to look at the root philosophy behind the climate alarmism, what you find out is that the ideal is an unimpacted nature. Gaia. The environment. You hear people talking, we must save the environment. What is the environment, right? It's an intangible thing. What is it?
So it has evolved into a spiritual thing.
It is a spiritual thing.
And a goddess in a way.
In a real way. And everything we do is first measured not by how good it is for humans, how does it promote human flourishing and human well-being, but the first thing it's measured by is it impacting the planet? Is it impacting the environment? Are we changing Gaia? Of course, if you follow the logic of this ideal, then clearly the cure is that there will be no humans on the planet, right? Then the ideal is complete. Of course, no one will say that. So people try to say, oh, there are too many people in the world,
and
right?
They're not ashamed to say that.
No, no.
They declare it even on the Georgia Guidestones, which has been demolished over the last few months. It says limit world population to 500 million.
Yes, and when people tell me that in person, they tell me, okay, but you make the list. Right? Because we need to kill 7.5 billion people. You're going to make the list, not me. This is an unethical, immoral, inhumane statement. And this is where the clash of philosophies come into play. On one side, there's this philosophy which tells that humans are bad. We are an intrusion, an interruption to the ideal. While I am a humanist, I long for human flourishing and human well-being. I want to reduce human suffering as much as I possibly can, on the personal level, on the community level, and if I can, on the global level. Now, the amazing thing is that the statistics clearly show that the more people we have, the better off we are in essentially every measurable quantity. If you look at GDP, if you look at literacy percentage, if you look at lifespan, if you look at health, various parameters of health, if you look at hunger, you know, the percentage of malnutrition children, in any measurable quantity, the more humans we have, the better off we are. There's an amazing book that came right a few weeks ago by two authors, Marian Tupy and Gail Pooley, called Superabundance, where they actually do the statistics. And it's unbelievable. We are 8 times more wealthy, materially wealthy. Our well-being is 8 times higher than our young grandparents, 60 or 70 years ago. That's an amazing number. We've basically eradicated world poverty. If you look 100, 150 years ago, 85 to 90% of population were below the UN absolute poverty line, $2.9 a day. Now that number is at 10%. How did we do this? We do this by innovation. We did this by free thinking. And we did this really by allowing people to have kids. More people mean more brains that can think and innovate and make our life better. And we also did this, allow me to add, using fossil fuels.
Yes. We differ on many levels when it comes to, you know, spiritual things, because I think you said to me you define yourself as an atheist. Am I right?
Well, an atheist or agnostic, I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Well, I'm here hopefully to change it, but I will tell you that I truly believe not only in creation, but I also believe that scripturally, the Bible says that when God created the world, it was very good. It was very, very good. And it's only from the moment sin entered the world, we are watching everything imploding. And it seems like mankind is trying to find solutions ever since to recover from the problem that mankind could have easily avoided if they only did what God told them to do. Now, I will tell you that this drive to kill people.
And this is a strong statement that you're saying.
Drive to kill people.
I don't think people are consciously thinking that, but this is what their actions imply.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
I'm telling you, there is a huge difference between what they say and what they mean. And I can tell you, you don't have to agree with me, but I can tell you that from a spiritual perspective, when I even see how easily it is now in America and other places around the world to just decide, I've got a baby, I'm 9 months pregnant, I can kill it. It's okay, it's my choice, it's my body. The loss of
evaluation of human life.
Value for human life, which is exactly the opposite of the cause for human, as you just said, to actually do well, to do better. And the more we kill people, first of all, it says a lot about us and our heart, but also it brings us even down, not up, in a way, even scientifically.
Oh yeah, so let me say a few things about what you said. As you said, I'm not a religious person per se,
But your
I
mother
do-
is a teacher of Bible.
She is. So I know a lot of the
You're
Bible. I
Jew-
read the Talmud and I read the Bible a lot.
You were born where?
I was born in Beersheba, in the southern
In
part of
Beersheba,
Israel.
where Abraham was.
Yes,
Yes.
So the well of Abraham, which is, by tradition, this is the well
Yes,
where
yes,
Abraham
yes,
took
yes.
his oath, was less than a mile from where my
So
childhood
look,
home.
you're a Jewish guy born where Abraham himself lived for a long time. Your mom is teaching the Bible. It's soaked into every fiber of almost every person that lives even in this city. And I respect that you're a scientist and that you're a professor and you're actually valuing life.
This is the point. And this is what I wanted to say. Although I am an agnostic, I do share the religious sentiment to the value of human life.
biblical one.
Yes,
Yes.
we were born B'Tselem.
Yes, in the
We're
image
born
of
in
God.
the image of God.
Absolutely.
I truly believe that. I think what you pinpointed.
We were born in the image of the God you don't believe in.
Well, look.
I'm joking.
No,
It's a
definitely
joke.
fine. And
What-
I'm not a practicing Jew.
I'm trying to
but
tell you that you believe in God without knowing.
That might be the case.
Okay, good.
Fair enough. And I'm not a practicing Jew.
Okay, good.
But I'm definitely Jewish by ethnicity or by nationality, and I'm a proud Zionist.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a globalist in that sense. And
Good.
well,
See?
I am what I am.
You see, I'm telling
Right.
you, you're getting closer and closer. Okay.
Now, but I want to pinpoint something that you
Please,
said and make
please,
it sharp.
do that.
You pinpointed one of the paradoxes of modern progressive thinking. Because modern progressive thinking is all about me and my rights, what I am entitled to. And with this, what's important to me, we are losing, in a way, the value of others as humans. The abortion issue is complicated, and please don't drag
I'm
me
not
into
dragging you into it at
Please.
all, and everything I say about it, it's my perspective
Yes,
of it.
but-
But I can tell you that even through this, you can see that the mindset of so many has been brainwashed to detest the life of a little baby.
What I can tell you about this is that I do appreciate the moral stance of pro-life movement.
Yes. As a scientist, pro-life, what is the opposite of pro-life? Let's not talk politics. Let's talk Hebrew. Let's talk language. What is the opposite of pro-life?
Yes.
Pro-death.
So
Or you cannot say pro-choice because in the Bible, life is choice. That's why you cannot say
not
pro-life
only in
and
the
pro-choice.
Bible.
I know.
Not
God said
in the world.
Correct,
The
but-
more choice we have, the better off.
But the Lord
we are.
said to Moses, tell them,
The more-
I put before you today death and life. Choose life.
Yeah.
It's our choice to, we need to choose life. And when let's leave abortion back to climate.
Yes, please.
Yes, I understand. We're now watching, and that's the topic of this whole conversation today. We're watching the world becoming brainwashed with something that has no scientific backing, with something that is being completely pushed by people that are not even scientists, and it is something that causes people to actually value less human life and value more comfort of the moment. But even by doing that, they cause the opposite.
Yes. And this is an amazing insight. The amazing thing about this insight is that people who share those beliefs don't see it. They're saying, no, we must protect Earth, Mother Earth. We must protect the environment. It's for the betterness of our grandchildren. We must protect it.
Yes.
But when you do this, you are doing two things. You are really subjecting yourself to a new form of mysticism or even religion. Many people have suggested that, climate alarmism or climate catastrophism is a new form of religion. And when you're doing that, what you're really doing is making yourself feel better.
Correct.
By taking your own moral stance while causing harm and pain and suffering to other people. mostly people in the underdeveloped world, and we can talk a lot about examples for that, but now also suffering for people in the modern world, in Europe, which is going to suffer an energy crisis, and the working class people in America, which need to worry about gas prices going up, and so forth.
Now, as a non-practicing Jew, you yourself can even see the rise of a new religion.
Yes, I
A
can.
new religion with a goddess, with priests, with the faulty people, and with the sin. Okay, I want to quote to you a verse from the New Testament that I believe in. By the way, I want to tell you something. When I became a believer in the New Testament, it was not because I read the New Testament. I actually read Jeremiah, when it says that God will give the people of Israel a New Testament. But I will tell you that it says in the book of Romans chapter 1, in verse 25, about those people that are going to come. It says, they exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshipped and served the creature, the creation, rather than the creator. I think this verse is summarizing what we see today. The hunger and thirst to worship creation, Mother Earth. It's something that I can trace back to
relates
Babylonians.
Yeah, it's
the
a pagan thing, right?
Pagan thing, absolutely pagan thing. So now, why am I saying pagan thing? Because guess what? A few months ago, Pope Francis just declared that he's, by the way, is way into this whole thing. They got him big time. The Catholic Church today is very determined to take an active role in this whole thing. Yes. And I will tell you that because not long ago, we were shooting here inside the old city a video that is talking about the rise of the one world religion. The one world religion that will eventually be on everything but God. It will be about
Gaia.
Yeah, it will be about nature. It will be about you choose your own sexual identity. Now, we don't go into this, but I will tell you that we are watching a rise of a new world religion, and this climate change is a huge factor in it because it creates the alarm that the world needs in order to group around an idea that is not necessarily belongs to a specific religion.
Yes. First of all, let me say that this is not my own idea. I mean, this idea of climate alarmism as a new religion was already raised by Patrick Moore and by Michael Schellenberger and other...
Yeah, but Patrick Moore made a mistake in the way that he believes that Christians are the biggest propagators of this. And I'm telling you, millions of people that are watching this or will watch this agree with you more than what the Pope is saying.
And we can talk about why this is. And I have an idea. When you think about religion, you can compare the climate alarmist movement, and as we said, its roots in the green movement, in the environmental movements, you can compare it to the Judeo-Christian principles.
Yes.
You have a God. It's Gaia, right? The ideal of environment. Now you have a sin. Now the sin is no longer the Christian sin. Now it's the sin of changing Gaia.
And so the sin is consumption, the sin is CO2 emission,
building
capitalism.
Things, industry, you name it. Impacting Gaia is the primal sin, right? Now, once you have the sin, you have the commandment. Thou shalt not emit CO2.
Okay.
Thou shalt build solar panels and wind turbines. These are, they look like commandments. And you have prophets. James Hansen, Greta Thunberg. You have the prophets. You have priests. Priests, spreading the word. And you have believers of all spectrum, right? You have people who say, okay, yeah, maybe it's correct. You have really passionate believers. You have a Catholic hell, right?
Absolutely.
We're going to burn. Gaia will punish us. And they didn't even invent the punishment. They just took it out of the New Testament, right? We're going to burn in hell.
They take the lake of fire and borrow it for their own...
So it has characteristics of a religion. And when I talk to people, and I try to talk to as many people as I can from both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and I see it. I see people that you talk to them about the data. And they say, yeah, maybe this is correct. We don't know, you're sure. And then I ask them, so what do you think? They say, situation is very bad. We're doomed.
They agree with the data, but they're captured with this mindset.
Yes.
Give me the main points where you see great hypocrisy in the ranks and the claims of that movement of climate change.
There are numerous examples for that. You know, the climate alarmist movement, you know, these people are trying to say, oh, we want to better the world and make everything great. So they gathered in the last climate conference, this COP26, the climate conference in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. Of course, in light of the energy crisis, there was no agreement in terms of CO2. And of course, there were no delegates from China, Brazil, India, Malaysia, Russia. None of them was there, so there's nothing to do. But there was one contract that was signed. In a very glorious ceremony, 20 countries from Central Europe and the major development banks in the world signed a statement, a contract, that they will not invest money, lend money, or give collaterals to infrastructure construction based on fossil fuels in Africa.
Wow.
They're
actually punishing Africa.
Now, who are these signatories? Belgium, for God's sakes. The Netherlands, the UK, all these places which have sucked the resources out of Africa. 1.3 billion people who are living in poverty. 800 million people in Africa do not have constant electricity. 3 billion people in the world living on the same amount of power as one American refrigerator. And you are banning loans and investment for infrastructure in Africa and condemning them to energy poverty and by that to real poverty. This is, I cannot think of something more hypocritical.
But they will tell you, hey, only investment in fossil fuel, not in...
But there is no renewable energies. What we should really call them is unreliable energy. Wind and solar cannot provide us. You know, if you look global at the electricity market, wind and solar provide about 8 to 10%. If you look at the total energy humans are consuming, it's between 1 and 3%. That's how they want the Africans to live? In 1 to 3% power? That's an immoral, inhumane thing. And this is a signed contract at Glasgow COP26.
So let's look great and punish someone.
Exactly. We're going to be the moral people. We're going to feel good about ourselves, no matter the consequence. Let me give you another example.
Please.
We talked already about the crazy policy fueled by climate alarmism, which led to the energy crisis. Now let's talk about Pakistan. Not the wealthiest country we can imagine, but the Pakistani government is doing an effort. And a few years ago, they spent a lot of money and effort building infrastructure for liquid gas to power and generate electricity. Reliable, cheap electricity. And they signed long-term contracts with Qatar and with other providers of gas to supply them with gas. Now, because of the European policy, gas prices soared 6 to 10 times, 10x. Unbelievable.
They cannot even take that now.
No, so the Qataris broke the contracts with the Pakistani. They're paying a penalty, 130%.
Because they can sell it
But they can sell it to the Europeans at 300%.
Unbelievable.
And now there are electricity outages and no power in Pakistan. And this, you know, ruins industry and hospitals and universities.
Even agriculture.
And schools and agricultures. Who's going to pay the price for that? Not the wealthy Europeans.
Amazing.
It's the Pakistani. Let me give you a third example. Sri Lanka, a nation of 22 million people, a few years ago was considered one of the rising stars of Southeast Asia with a growth rate of 7%. They were doing really well. And then they were persuaded to go to organic farming. We are polluting the planet. We must use farming like our ancestors did. Within 2 years, the yield of planting in Sri Lanka went down to 25%. No food shortages in Sri Lanka.
That's why they kicked out their president now.
Riots in the street,
Yes.
violent kicking out of the prime ministers. They're bankrupt. And now they're begging the World Bank for loans. This happened in 2 years of irresponsible, irrational, and immoral behavior.
Amazing.
Fueled by the idea that we are ruining the planet. I have many more examples
Yes.
like this.
But
It's
I get it.
all over the place.
Amazing. I have good news and bad news. The good news is you've seen the light when it comes to climate change. Were you ever on the other side, by the way?
Of course I was.
Were you?
I was, yes. I was liberal
Progressive.
left. Yes.
Progressive mindset.
And I was worried as the next guy about climate change. And then when I came back from the United States to Israel, I spent a year and a half in industry, working about solutions to energy conversion, using nanotechnology, whatever. And part of this work was studying what solar panels really are. And I know the physics of solar panels really well.
That's your field.
That's my field, part of my field, yes. And I saw that, and I was bamboozled by the contrast between what these things really can do and what people tell us they can do. These things just don't match. And this is what I do. I fit models to real life. And these things cannot power our society. And
They can help, they can support, but not be the main one. Never.
it's even questionable whether they can support and if they're not really a parasite on an existing system.
Wow.
And they're not renewable because 15 to 20 years you need to throw them all away. Millions of solar panels which have some toxic and heavy metals in them which need to be dealt with. It's not an easy problem. So I looked at this and I said, well, the data doesn't add up. Maybe we were told the wrong thing. So I started looking into this. And then, one thing led to the other. I started thinking about the climate problem and I looked at the data. I don't read the summaries. I don't read the abstracts. I just look at the data.
As a scientist, valuing science, everybody's telling us to trust science, but then when science clashing with their agenda, then science should be silenced.
And this is an amazing thing. You hear statements like, the science is settled. You hear university boards saying that we should not allow people to express themselves if they're not supporting the known consensus. When was the last time we heard these things? During the times of Galileo and the Catholic consensus that the sun is orbiting the earth. That's a Catholic statement, the science is settled. And hearing this from a university which is bound to the search for the truth. And how can you search for truth without expanding and without questioning the existing knowledge?
So that's the good news, that you finally came to the realization that there is an agenda here. The bad news, and you and I know that, we will not win here. Let's face it, Earth will not adopt our beliefs in the fact that this is a scam. Earth will fall deeper, I'm talking about society, deeper into this deception and into this new rising religion.
If you would ask me this question a year and a half ago, I would be, along with you, probably 95%. However, I think we're in a strange situation now that this agenda has collapsed on the wall of reality and real life, and the lack of abundance of power, electrical power, and the rising prices of electricity, which lead to deaths from cold during winter in Europe, and the rising costs of food. And I have to tell you, on the short term, I'm pessimistic. We're going to see food shortages. We're going to see famine in the developing countries because the manufacturing of fertilizer requires natural gas. Now, Europe has reduced in 50% its fertilizer capabilities, fertilizer manufacturing capabilities. No fertilizers, no food.
And now with the sanction on Russia, even
sanctions
more.
on Russia and Ukraine, and they're banning the Dutch farmers from increasing their farms. They're telling them you have to reduce their farms. These are the most efficient farmers in the world. A small country like the Netherlands supplying a huge amount of food to Europe and one of the largest exporters of food, and they're saying, no, you have to reduce your food production.
And your farms and kill the cows, because God forbid, excuse me for my language, they fart and we are dying.
Yes, and these things will clash on the wall of reality. And I truly think that enough people are rational enough to understand and to value human flourishing,
yes,
and human needs over this ideal of the environment.
I want to read to everyone that is watching us. 2,000 years ago, really not far from here.
Really not far.
Yeah. The disciples of Jesus, they left the temple, crossed the Kidron, went up on Mount of Olives. And the Bible says, and as he sat on Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And then he answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you." First of all, the first thing he said, deception will be rampant. I mean, people will tell you lies all the time. And after he talked about how many false messiahs will come, he says this, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." I believe that they're coming a climate change, but it has absolutely nothing to do with CO2, and it has nothing to do with the globalists' effort to reduce that. To me, everything that has been prophesied through Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea, everything has come to pass. So I have no doubt that there is coming a chapter in our history where things will be different, but I can tell you that I agree with you 100% that what we see today is fake crisis to promote other agendas. And what are those agendas? Do they really want to kill people? What is it that they're trying to achieve?
Yes, let me first say something
Please.
about what
Go
you
ahead.
just said. I don't know about the end of days, the biblical end of days.
I do. Yeah.
I don't.
I understand.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that until we get there, we need to try to make the lives of people on earth
Absolutely.
as best as possible,
Absolutely.
as flourishing as possible. That's the only thing I'm saying. So there's no real contradiction in that manner.
there isn't.
This is the point I tried to say. There's no real contradiction. Now you're asking me about the motives. What's behind this agenda? And let me first say, I don't think there's a real conspiracy per se.
Not in the Club of Rome? You think
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't been to the room.
Okay.
But I find it hard to believe. What I think there is a collapse or a merge of various incentives and motives. And there are few. One motive is, of course, political power. You can call this a conspiracy,
Yes.
but it's a conspiracy.
I actually don't call it conspiracy. I believe they want power.
Yes, this I totally agree.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
That's one. That's a trivial motive. One motive, huge motive, is money.
Money. I also
The
agree.
US government is going to spend $300 billion on wind power and solar panels.
So you better say yes,
You
even
better
if you don't
say,
agree with it.
Oh yeah, huge amounts of money invested in renewable energies that will do nothing, will only reduce the reliability of the grid, will make people's life worse, not better. So tons of money. In academia, there is the incentive, there are a lot of incentives in academia. You know, people tend to hang on to their underlying beliefs and project them into their science. This is a well-known bias in science. And there are huge funds for research. So people who attend to believe in the agenda join the faculties and get research. And now you're not going to do research which goes against the agenda of the funding, right?
So you satisfy your donors
Right.
and your academic institution.
Yes. But why is there such a huge support of the common people, right? I would say, you know, people who don't belong to this group, just people I see in the street, and they're really good people, and they want to do good, and they want to be moral people, and they say we have to stop using
So it's
electricity.
mankind's attempt to look righteous,
Yes.
to look good.
And I think there is a combination of the rise of secularity. People are losing faith in traditional religions. And this is accompanied by some feeling
It's the rise of secularity or the move into a new and better religion that, because it is a religion.
That's the result. The underlying cause is the mixture of loss of meaningless or the rise of meaninglessness, which you see and it's documented in
Absolutely.
psychology research, and the amazing material abundance that we live in. We're living in a singular point in humanity that has never been better. It's never been better. Never in the history of humanity has so many people woke up in the morning and didn't have to worry about what they're going to eat at night. So these two made a vacuum for meaning, and people need meaning. I truly think that's a deep, you can call it, you know, spiritual, I call it psychological, but that's a deep,
It's a void.
it's a void.
Void.
And it's rooted into the human condition. We need meaning. Now,
I love hearing it from you.
No,
because
I mean,
you know that I know the answer, but
I
hear from you.
I told you this when you talked privately.
Yeah.
I completely respect this.
Yes.
And I find meaning in other things. I find meaning in my family and in my science and in my community and, you know, in doing other things. But I completely respect the meaning that you find in faith. There's a difference between this new religion and organized or traditional religions like the Catholic Church. One is that the believers of this religion are unaware of the religiousness. They're saying, no, we are moral because we are moral and we believe in the science. They're taking the higher moral ground. And I'm saying, no, you are being immoral because the fundamental root of your religion is removing humanity. And
Death,
yes.
death, poverty, death, everything that is the outcome.
I'm
of-
pro-humanist, so you're not the moral grounds. I have the moral grounds. The second thing is that in the name of this religion, they want to tell you and me how to live. And they're doing it already. As we said, in Europe, they're going to say you can't use power. In California, the electricity authority told people not to charge their cars and not to use electricity during peak hours. In California.
Wealthiest state in America.
It's not going to be that for
I
long.
know, I'm just
But
saying.
so they're already doing this. So these are two central differences. But the origin is the void that came out of meaninglessness and wealth. Now, I understand these people. When I talk to people, and I talk to a lot of people, and these are good people, honestly. These are, you know, they want to do good. They don't know how. And what I tell them, You want to do good, you want to be an activist, fine. But don't be a global activist. Don't be a climate activist because you're consecrating a thing that doesn't exist, Gaia, the environment. These are mystical beings. You want to be an activist, be environmental activist. That means pick a fight, pick a problem that is dear to your heart, look at the main causes to the problem, and fight to solve that problem. But that's much harder.
Much harder to clean the beaches.
Much harder because environmental activism is local and it's hard. You know, it takes a lot of time and effort. It's much easier, you know, to go to a rally, climate rally, and say, oh, let's ban fossil fuels and make the world a better place. You're making the world a worse place.
Much, much worse. Well, I think we touched main focus of our talk today, which is how climate change becomes a new world religion. And as you said, they don't even know that. They don't even notice that.
Agree.
They are new recruits to a semi-organized religion that has roots that goes back to Babylonian and Greek and other teachings of Mother Earth being the god, and anything that humans do that is interfering nature is actually the problem. New set of commands, new set of rules, and they don't value human lives as much as they think they do. They don't. In fact, the direct consequences of most of what they do is the opposite. In my eyes, and again, my belief is that sin is the root of problem, rebellion against the word of God. The Bible says in the book of Hosea, chapter 5, verse 15, I will return again to my place until they acknowledge their offense, and through their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. I think that the affliction that this world will go through, hopefully will finally get people to understand that God so loved the world. It's not that he hates the world, he loves the world. He gave us a wonderful way to come back to him by the atoning death of the Messiah and his resurrection. And in my mind, as long as humans will push God away, they will spiral down more and more to find solutions that are bringing their own destruction. This is my conviction. And I love the way you described this new religion, because it's one thing for me, based on how I believe, to say that, but it's another thing for even someone who does not hold my own beliefs to notice that, to see a professor in a university, a scientist, someone who was born here, someone who understands that there is more to these things than only what we're being told. I want to thank you, Yoni, for being with us. Is there any last thing you want to say for the audience?
I want to end with a positive message.
Please.
On a positive note, if people are hearing us and you know they want to do good and they were thinking about going into these climate rallies or things like that, it's okay to want to do good, but there's a difference between really doing something good and doing something that makes you feel good. And this difference is important. And I want to finish maybe with a message to the viewers and to maybe to the younger people who are listening to us. When I talked to Professor Bill Happer, which was mentioned here, I asked him, so what should we do to improve the environment? And he told me an amazing answer. He said, well, most of your environment is the people around you, your friends, your family, your community.
Yeah.
Be nice to them. And I think this is an amazing message.
Love your neighbor.
That I
Bill
personally
Happer,
very like. Yes.
Bill Happer, Princeton University. I think he read Isaiah chapter 1. When I read the prophet Isaiah, I nearly choked, because the first chapter of his book says God hates religion. Can you imagine? Okay. God speaks to Isaiah to tell the people of Israel, religion is not the answer, treat one another. Look what he says. He says this. He says, your new moons, your appointed feasts, my soul hates. God says, they are trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Now he says, just what Bill said, wash yourself, make yourself clean, and put away the evil from your doing from before me. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Come now and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be like white as snow. And though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. You see, even in the Bible, we see that you can pretend to do religious stuff as long as you want. If you don't take care even of your neighbor, if you're not changing who you are towards others, you will never be able to please God.
These words are touching even for
Yeah.
a secular humanist. Like me.
Absolutely.
These are beautiful words.
These are beautiful words, and the same Isaiah said also later on how God eventually provided solution for sin. Isaiah chapter 53, go home, read it, and write to me later what you think. That's the chapter that changed my life as a Jew, born in Jerusalem, to a Jewish family. And thank you again, Yoni.
You're most welcome.
What a very informative talk we had, and I learned a lot. I'm sure many people learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to do more things with you in the future. All right.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
and God bless. Bye-bye.